Aspen Pharmacare, confirming that the first supply of Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine doses will be released from its manufacturing site in Gqeberha. We're joined now by Dr. Stavros Nicolaou, the Aspen Pharmacare Group Senior Executive responsible for strategic trade development. Stavros, good afternoon to you. As I understand it, you're getting batches from Europe. What exactly are you getting from Europe, and what do you do to those batches?
Stephen, firstly, thanks very much and good afternoon to all the viewers. Stephen, in fact, we've received the drug substance from Europe. The manufacture of the product, what we call the full finish and packaging of the product, is what Aspen does at its Gqeberha facility, as you've indicated. And today is a landmark day, both for Aspen and I believe for the African continent as well, because the first Johnson & Johnson COVID vaccines have been produced by Aspen, an African manufacturer on African soil for South African and African patients. So it is a first for us, and it's going to significantly improve what has up until now been a grossly inequitable vaccine rollout program, globally speaking. So we all know that Africa has received around 1% or less of the 3.8 billion doses that have currently been administered into patients' arms. Africa's received 1% or less. This development is significant, not only because it is an African company doing this, but it will also assist in improving the inequity that currently exists with vaccine distribution.
So how many doses are we talking about? At what rate can you produce these doses as they come out?
Stephen, firstly, the extent and the pace at which Aspen can manufacture these doses is largely dependent on how much drug substance we receive from Europe. But all things being equal, if we receive sufficient supplies, our capacity is to manufacture 20 to 25 million doses a month. Now, to put that in perspective, the entire requirement of Johnson & Johnson for South Africa is 31 million doses over an annualized period. So that will give you an indication that Aspen capacities are significant in terms of rolling out the vaccine, both here in South Africa, but also more broadly the continent. Understanding that part of the arrangement with J&J, and certainly from October onwards, everything that Aspen produces will be for South Africa and the African continent.
I mean, that number of doses every month, you're looking at basically 6 weeks production. If you get enough of the drug ingredients, 6 weeks production would be enough to do the country. It's amazing.
Stephen, of course, it would be nice if we could look at it that way, of course, but the demand and supply alignment against your capacity that you have in the country is a little more complex than that. But I think what we take a lot of heart from as Aspen is how significantly the acceleration in the South African rollout program has been over the past few weeks. And we are vaccinating 1 million people in roughly every 4 to 5 days. So this production out of the Aspen facility in the Eastern Cape will add to that momentum that we're experiencing. It will give further traction to the program. But I think more importantly, it gives us a better sense of security of supply. And that's what Africa's been grappling with. We haven't really had security of supply of any vaccines, let alone this one, in the midst of what is the most damaging pandemic that we've ever experienced.
How long does it take from getting the ingredients to when they then come out of the factory? How long is that process?
Stephen, a very complex question because there are a number of steps that are involved end to end, as we call it, from the time you actually receive the drug substance in these solution containers, and you receive it in a thawed. It's a thawed liquid that you receive. You've got to de-thaw it, and then the fill and finish steps proceed from there. So in an ideal world, it would probably take you around 6 weeks. But of course, there are steps in that process that neither we nor Johnson & Johnson control. So things like quality releases and other elements in the production chain are out of our control. So very hard to estimate. I think I would rather look at it on the basis of what Johnson & Johnson has committed to South Africa. They've committed to supply 31 million doses, and of course a significant chunk of that will come out of South Africa, produced by a South African manufacturer.
It really is quite something that we're seeing here. You've been working with government as well on this. I mean, from what we can see, it would seem that government and the private sector in South Africa working together have the capacity to very quickly distribute what comes out of your factory.
That's correct, Stephen. So although we might have had a slow start out to the rollout program here in South Africa, I think that's partly been because the country couldn't secure supplies, or neither sufficient quantities of supply nor regular supply for that matter. And that's why it is so important to have your own capacity in South Africa and on the continent. It's the only way that you can really deal with any of the disproportionate vaccine distribution we're seeing globally. I've mentioned the numbers earlier, but also importantly, in terms of security of supply, because you need to successfully roll out a program, you need to have a cadence of supply, you need to get into a rhythm. And we're getting into that groove now as South Africa. And having a local manufacturer producing the Johnson & Johnson vaccine for and on behalf of J&J is critical to getting added momentum to the rollout in our country and beyond the borders of our country.
There's a lot in the political sphere around vaccines. We've seen one or two politicians supporting other vaccines. We know the Sinovac vaccine has been approved for emergency use by the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority. At the moment, though, it's the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, the single-dose vaccine, and the Pfizer vaccine, which are the ones that have been distributed here. But it seems that so it's the Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer vaccine that have been used here. The Sinovac vaccine is coming. How do you see that dynamic playing out?
So, Stephen, I can't really comment for any other vaccine. And I mean, in fact, the vaccine that Aspen contract manufactures is actually Johnson & Johnson's vaccine. We're the contract manufacturer, and it would really be for them to comment on their own vaccine, of course. The only thing I can say, of course, is that it always assists immensely, as I've indicated, to have your own local capacities. We've seen this time and time again. I equate the global scramble for vaccines to Hunger Games, where it's every man for himself. And although there might have been a lot around solidarity and all of this at the beginning of, if we dial the clock back to last March, April, May, when there was this whole solidarity talk going around that we're only safe if we're all safe, unfortunately, that hasn't proven to be the case. And it's, the countries that are producing these vaccines en masse have largely been the first beneficiaries, save their populations and their citizens. So all I can really say is there's immense value to having your own capacities on the continent. And Aspen is certainly looking to expand its ambition around vaccine manufacturing, because it's not just around COVID vaccines. I mean, Africa is both understated and undercapacitated when it comes to vaccines. And a continent like ours that has the most disproportionate disease burden of any continent requires its own capabilities and its own capacities. And then only will it get ahead of managing all these pandemics and the health priorities that our continent faces, year in, year out. And so our ambition is certainly to look at, there's been a discussion, the president in one of his State of the Nation addresses raised a Johnson & Johnson licensing arrangement. So we've got an ambition to expand our capacities beyond what they are, so that we can get to, as our CEO Stephen Saad said, one African, one vaccine is what Aspen is aiming for futuristically.
There are all sorts of things in the supply chain for this. I mean, I'm sure someone somewhere has to supply injections and needles, for example, for the health department and the private sector when they do the vaccinations. A lot of people are very interested in the little glass vials that the vaccines actually come in. Are those produced here, for example? I mean, there's a whole lot of different things that need to be produced to make this happen.
Stephen, let me start off from a vantage point that Africa and South Africa are chronic or serial under-localizers, if I can call it that. So it always amazes me, and has for some time, that a country and a continent with our disease burden, as I indicated earlier, are serial importers of medicines, vaccines, medical equipment. That includes, incidentally, syringes and needles. So there's a real opportunity, and I think there's hardly a politician these days that isn't talking about the need to localize. And I think if I'm to take anything out of where we are with the vaccine rollout in our country, there are two things. Firstly, that the best economic recovery plan right now is vaccines, and to vaccinate as many citizens as quickly as possible. Then only do you get on top of this and start planning your economic recovery, or start implementing your economic recovery, I should say, and also your future economic growth. And then secondly, we should be looking at both up and downstream manufacturing all these components and all the different materials that go into the production of vaccines and other medicines. I'm not just confining it to vaccines. Pharmaceuticals, medical devices are the fifth biggest contributor to South Africa's current account deficit. That makes absolutely no sense to me. Because no, it's a double whammy. Not only are you importing everything and exporting all the jobs out of the country, but secondly, these small businesses that could benefit potentially from any downstream activities are not the beneficiaries. So there's a lot to be done around this localization effort. Antiretrovirals is another good example. We import most of our ARVs, yet we have the single biggest ARV population in the world. So it's an excellent point, Stephen, that you've made. And hopefully this is the spark that also triggers a real pharmaceutical and vaccine localization effort in our country for South Africa and the continent as well.
Dr. Stavros Nicolaou, thank you very much indeed from Aspen Pharmacare. I do appreciate the time.